There's a lot of ways to examine the Old West, especially if you are going to be picking apart some of the tropes that have been associated with it in film. Funny how most of them still end in death. This is a commissioned review, and no, my mentioning that fact isn't really a spoiler, but I will have to get into what could probably be considered spoilers for a movie that also, by its nature, resists even being spoiled. But anyway, I was commissioned to take a look at The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. This is a Coen Brothers film, and I don't think I've talked about a Coen Brothers movie on either this or the main channel before. The Coen Brothers are very well, I was going to say very hit or miss. That's actually not true. About the worst thing that I can ever say about their stuff is that was interesting, but a fair amount of it doesn't really click for me. I actually still don't really get what most people see in No Country for Old Men outside of Javier Bardem's performance, and that is not enough to carry the movie for me. I don't really get the appeal of Raising Arizona. Some of their more recent stuff just hasn't clicked with me on concept. But then, like, when I like their stuff, I really like their stuff. I like Fargo a lot. I love The Big Lebowski. I adore Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? So they're always worth checking out. And I think the other one relevant to this is to bring up I really like True Grit. Not sure I ever need to see it again, but I do like it. So this is them returning to the world of Westerns. But whereas True Grit was very much an attempt to inject as much down and dirty realism into things as possible, this is not really doing that, at least not consistently. There are bits that do that. There are other bits that are preposterously stylized. There are some things that are dark and depressing. There are some things that are ridiculous. And it's an odd film to try and talk about because it feels a little bit more like talking about, well, a collection of short stories. Because this is, in fact, an anthology film. There are 6 short films contained within the greater film. There is Buster Scruggs, which actually opens the whole thing and is admittedly probably my favorite of the bunch, though that just is kind of a case of them using the type of tone they do that just really works for me. There's another one, Algone, I think is what it's called. It's the one with the robbery. Then there's Meal Ticket, the Gold Canyon, or it's titled something like that, The Girl Who Got Rattled, and Mortal Remains. And they are all, at worst, interesting. None of them are bad. Some, well, one in particular did drag for me a bit, but I also understand why it's structured the way that it is. That one being The Girl Who Got Rattled. That, I get why it is as slow moving as it is for the type of story it is, because for where it's ultimately going, yeah, it kind of needed to be that way. But my attention did still waver a bit during that one in a way that it didn't really with the others. Because even with some of the more slower paced stories like The Gold Canyon or like Meal Ticket, even though they were moving forward slowly, they were definitively moving forward. And what they appeared to be moving towards was something that was gripping to me in some way. But as I said, the tone individually for these is all over the place. The opening one, Buster Scruggs, is actually hilarious, as is the second one. The one with the robbery, the name which I'm not entirely sure I got right before. Those are actually both quite funny, although interestingly in sort of lesser degrees. The Buster Scruggs one is like absurdist levels of hilarious. I really do like that one a lot. And the next one is a little bit more grounded, but still pretty ridiculous in the humor that's involved in it. Meal Ticket is almost devoid of anything but the darkest of laughs. Like, it's the kind of thing where if you laugh at it, it's because it's a defense mechanism. Like, I can see some ways in which you can find humor in it, but it's a macabre kind of humor to be found in that one. And then with The Gold Canyon, I feel like that might be the one most devoid of humor, although even that one still has a couple of little moments that are good for a chuckle sprinkled within, but as an inherent story, it probably has the least humor baked into it, even dark humor. And then there's The Girl Who Got Rattled, which has some awkward humor going along, which folks who are regular viewers know, not my favorite kind of humor. And then Mortal Remains has a little bit of an edge to it, but in that kind of what's the comparison I would make? Sort of Tales from the Crypt kind of humor, where yeah, it's kind of dark, but it's also not in a oh god, I have to laugh, otherwise I'll be depressed kind of way that Meal Ticket is. But it's rather more kind of it's taking a lighter tone to some dark material sort of thing. All of these have really, like, the cast is pretty stacked and it's fascinating. And pretty much everybody turns in a good job. The absolute highlights for me would probably have been Tim Blake Nelson playing Buster Scruggs in the opening one. Tom Waits in The Gold Canyon, who has to basically carry that entire thing himself. And like, I just find Tom Waits compelling just to watch. I've always found him fascinating. Harry Mellings in Meal Ticket was also, like, considering how limited what he was actually doing, like as a performer, how few things he was able to use, he gives a very full performance just in the way he delivers often the same line you've already heard him say, and just little differences in the performance. It's shockingly layered. But like I said, they're all good. There isn't a bad performance in here. As I said, I do think the first one is my favorite. I'm not going to say it's definitively the best. I do strongly suspect that if anyone were to rank these 6 in their own list of what they like best to least, I suspect a lot of it's just going to come down to personal taste, because none of these are bad in any kind of objective way. It's just a question of, does this approach to Old West cliches or little twists on them appeal to you more than the other ones? And again, for me, it opened with the strongest one. So this isn't quite as full-throated a deconstruction of sort of the glorification of the Old West the way that their True Grit movie was. But it is still kind of that, although often more about juxtaposing a sense of that mythologizing and that fantastical with something that feels like it should not also exist in the same place. I'll give you an idea with the Buster Scruggs one. This is not major spoilers. This happens pretty early on, but you've got Tim Blake Nelson playing this character who's like in this pristine white cowboy suit. You know, it's a very Roy Rogers thing. He's riding on his horse named Dan, playing his guitar. You know, he's absolutely corny. He is the corniest possible version of an Old West cowboy. It's like he's a cowboy who was pulled out of a theme park. And he goes into this bar and this saloon, and everybody in there is dirty, gritty, you know, looks dangerous. And he's just rolling it. Well, howdy there, partners. And, you know, the other people in that saloon don't take too well to him. And he shoots them all, like, incredibly skillfully. So he immediately establishes that no matter how he comes across, he is incredibly dangerous. And, like, the violence is, I wouldn't say super graphic. It's not hyper violence, but it's not shied away from either. And it's that juxtaposition of the extremes, part of what I really like about that one. Whereas the way some of the others deconstruct them is to be a little bit just cruel and harsh, the way Meal Ticket is, or to just take something that, like, is an element of Old West storytelling and just really zero in on it, which is kind of what Gold Canyon does. It just really focuses in on something that would usually be a backstory for a side character. And it makes for some interesting examinations, and pretty much all these characters are in some way exaggerated. It would be a stretch to call any of them caricature. Well, aside from Buster Scruggs, but like nobody here is like being portrayed as like, this is definitely like the real sense. Because even like the most toned down one, like Meal Ticket, is like, there's still some exaggeration going on with some of the stuff. But that does bring me to the one thing that I feel like I don't know how I feel about it, and I also feel like it's not necessarily my place to get on a soapbox about it, but I feel weird not pointing it out, which is that there are 2 stories in which indigenous characters. I believe Comanche warriors come into play, and they are portrayed in a way that feeds very much into the sort of savage warriors, sort of nasty, unpleasant cliches of a lot of, Western films and storytelling and cliches. And I don't generally look at what other people have said about movies that I am going to review. But I did want to look into that a little bit to see what people said, because I felt very mixed about it. And interestingly enough, in the response to that particular aspect was also very mixed. And like, I did specifically seek out, what did indigenous critics or filmmakers or people in the industry, what did they think about this? And it's incredibly mixed across the board. There were some who thought it was well deployed, given that these stories are from the perspectives of the white characters, and this would be the way that they saw them, or, pointing out that nobody is portrayed realistically. So you can make an argument that portraying them this way is exaggerating them in a similar way to all the other characters being exaggerated. But there were also definitely others who said, I kind of get why they did it. I still wish they hadn't. So I think my feeling very mixed and unsure about it is reflected in a lot of the responses to it. And even those who were a little bit more forgiving of it seem to understand why other people might not be. Now, whether that's a make or break for you, I don't know. It comes up in 2 out of 6 of the stories. And it really only kind of seriously matters in one of them. In one of them, it's slightly more incidental. But it is in there. And I think I'm also kind of the opinion that I would rather it didn't, because I felt like I understood the intentions of most of what was there, except for that stuff. So yeah, there is that. But overall, I did rather enjoy this. It's a weird, quirky little anthology movie. And in some ways, it almost feels like, this is going to be a weird comparison, it almost feels like the Western equivalent to heavy metal. Something just doing these different takes on the genre. It's just, in this case, it's A, not animated, and B, it's all coming from the same directors, as opposed to, getting a mix of people to tell different stories. There's still vastly different stories compared to each other, but they all come from the same directors with some pretty eclectic tastes. I said I was going to go into spoilers. I don't think I will. I think I'll actually avoid talking about that. But as I said, even if you know how one of the individual stories ends, they're so short that being here for the buildup is why you're here. Watching how we get to that end, even if you know it's coming. So it's not something that I'd actually worry about spoilers anyway, especially considering the plot resets. You're in a completely new one. There's no overarching thing at all. These are all 100% self-contained. So I found it a pleasant and interesting and quirky evening of viewing, which is very fitting for the Coens. The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Have you seen this thing? What was your favorite out of the 6 stories, if you have? If you haven't seen it, I don't know. What anthology films or deconstructions of Westerns do you particularly enjoy? Whatever your thoughts on any of this, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon's what pays the bills around here. Any amount you are able to help me does keep this entire operation afloat. This is, in fact, my living. But even if you can't, like, share, subscribe, help. But don't worry too much about that either, because we take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can come on back next time you need a break. Time to give my thanks to my highest supporting patrons. That would include Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Emu Delkey, Theotha Boyd, Becky Sparks, Fernabi Likes the Poodle, Zach, Idolin, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Adam RDL Taylor, Shane Ross, Shaylee Gourlay, Brendan LaRose, and TT. If you want your name said while these guys try and distract me, consider looking at the rewards on my Patreon.